of Quentin Collins and a ghost of Gerard Stiles. So, what do you think, Patrick? Do you think that Judah Zachary is so powerful that he's able to transcend two ghosts? That
Yeah,
he
I mean,
he
why not? I mean, if you know how to drive one car, can you drive another car? Yes. Well, it's the same idea.
he do you think that he was waiting for the right moment to strike?
Yes. Well, it's interesting. Yeah. Although it could have taken a tremendous amount of energy, maybe for him to reach out.
Mhm.
There are all sorts of possibilities, but I think there's a reason why. I think also, I think he recognized that Barnabas and Quentin together again for the very first time might have been a very potent combination, and that he had to sort of wipe them out because they were what could have come back in time and done him in.
Yeah. I think another thing to look at too is when they first actually reopen up the West Wing is when Victoria's going to marry Burke, and they're preparing a room for them.
Yes,
And they never really close the West Wing back off. And
no,
I think this is sort of what releases the energy that is Judah Zachary. He was waiting for the West Wing to be reopened.
okay,
I
yes,
I think some of his energy was in many different places, but more specifically Collinwood, because if there's one place he could have stored his energy, it would be in the very house that they built because he hated them and they hated him.
I can see that. Yeah.
You have this ghost who's trapped himself in the West Wing in Quentin's room, if you will. He's taken up Quentin's form. He's calling children off of a phone, an old timey phone. He's phoning them up. They're looking through the family history book. They're looking at pictures of Quentin. And really, what the kids are really doing is they're fooling themselves into thinking this is Quentin. Oh, he's told us this Quentin, so he has to be Quentin. No, he doesn't. He could be lying to you.
Hmm.
A ghost, just because we've never heard a ghost specifically lie, doesn't mean it won't happen.
Well, that's I mean, the idea of an unreliable narrator is, I think, really key to all of this.
Yeah.
And because we trust these narrators, but should we?
Yeah. I think it's easy. We talked about this a bit. It's easy to see why Beth is deceived, and it's not necessarily her fault too much. But even in the afterlife, she believes that Quentin has joined her, and she understands why she feels this is Quentin and why he's doing what he's doing because she knows what Quentin went through with the werewolf curse. She knows how Edward treated Quentin, how Judith treated Quentin, how Quentin's own the only person who really loved Quentin outside of Beth was Jameson. And when Jameson hurt Quentin,
That was it. It's game
that
over.
was right. So Beth, it's like I get why you're doing. So this is why she believes that the ghost she's seeing is Quentin, that she's talking to is Quentin, because she knows how bad Quentin has been hurt by his own family. Here's this man that literally, really, you could sort of somewhat compare it to Brutus a bit, because Brutus gets betrayed by the one person he trusted, and that was his sister.
Yeah.
With this, Quentin's an outcast, but Quentin gets turned into a werewolf by the gypsies. His brother pretty much wants nothing to do with him. Judith is only tolerating him because of her mother and their grandma. Them being, oh, Quentin's got to live in the house. They don't really want him there. And
No.
if she didn't insert that rule, they tell him to leave. And so they really hate Quentin's guts, and Quentin knows it too. when you watch David Selby's Quentin Collins, he has this very carefree attitude, but he can get the sense that Edward and Judith hate his guts.
Yes.
And that's something. It's easy to see why Beth was deceived.
Sure.
She wanted to believe that Quentin joined her in the afterlife, so she's sort of your unreliable narrator. But in every way, it's not her fault because she lived that shit. She knew Quentin's pain in every way.
I can see that.
And I think it makes her even more of a sympathetic ghost and a character.
Yes.
It doesn't, I don't feel it hurts the character. Do you?
No, not at all. I think it helps.
Yeah.
This is a family that puts up with Carl.
Yeah.
For God's sake. And to think, here Quentin shows up and it's like, my God, you'll deal with him? But not me. Okay, well, we all have to make these decisions at some point.
The guy who's holding Barnabas at gunpoint with the fake gun?
Yeah, fib.
My God. How much fun do you think John Carlin had playing that character?
Way too much. Way too much.
Oh my God. I think with the ghost of Gerard, what you're really seeing is another ghost that's this time we have Judah Zachary not using a Collins, but using somebody who's Gerard Stiles, but also Ivan Miller.
That's a whole other complicated, kettle of midgets. That's something else.
So here's this man whose identity isn't really his identity. Again, you could sort of look at with Beth thinking that Quentin's ghost is Quentin's ghost. Well, everybody sees Gerard Stiles, but what they don't know is, well, Gerard Stiles isn't really Gerard Stiles. He's Ivan Miller. He just changed his name to Gerard Stiles. And, for reasons, because, you have Gabriel blackmailing him about the Ivan Miller thing. And he's going to end up marrying Quentin's widow, which is really interesting in 1840. And keep in mind too, when Gerard / Ivan Miller does this is not Judah Zachary doing this. This really is Ivan Miller / Gerard Stiles marrying Quentin's widow, because this is somebody who was friends with Quentin, who was at sea with Quentin. We get the sense that Gerard chooses his. We also get the sense with Gerard Stiles and Ivan Miller that they choose their loyalties very wisely. If it comes between picking Quentin and the woman he just married, he's going to pick Quentin.
Yeah, I agree.
And again, when it comes to picking between Gabriel, who has no real power, and a woman who's widowed and has some power, he's going to pick a woman with power.
Yes, absolutely.
And I think when you look at the head of Judah Zachary, here's the head of Judah Zachary that has a ton of power, and now here's a prime victim for him to possess, for him to sort of enter the body of this man who keeps changing his name and keeps changing his identity. Why not give him a whole new identity again?
I agree.
I tell you what I love most. I love Humphrey Allen Alstrado in this 1840 arc. I really love his appearance. His first
as Charles Dawson.
Yeah, I feel Dawson. I know some people are going to say Nicholas Burr, but I think Charles Dawson was his best character.
Really? Why?
Because he's just so he's evil by literally a follower, and he has no power of his own in a sense. He's not he's not a warlock. He has no magical spells. He's just a loyal cult follower. And you sort of see this in real life when you look at Dark Shadows, and then you look at what was the guy's name? Oh god, who am I thinking about? The guy in the 60s. Oh my god. I kicked myself. The guy that murdered the cult that murdered Shannon Tate.
Oh, yeah, you're Amway.
Yeah.
No, it's not Amway.
Well,
they sell things. The Manson family. I always get them mixed up.
yeah, Charles Manson. So you have this cult, the cult of Judah Zachary, that's very loyal to their master. And who shows up but Charles Dawson, who's played by Halpern Allen Ostrato, with the head of Judah Zachary, the very head that Ivan Miller slash, Gerard Stiles threw off of Widow's Hill. And this thing survived that, only for Charles Dawson to appear to it, and now for Judah Zachary to possess Ivan Miller. And Dawson really is a full-blooded heel in court. He's twice as bad to me as what Reverend Trask was. He knows what's really going on, and he can only watch as he applauds his master for every little chess move he makes, and he loves it.
A little too much.
Well, here's the thing. I mean, that's the thing with Charles Dawson. He's not. I love heels that they go all the way in. They're not trying to pull back. They're not trying to give this heel a love story or a love sympathy angle. Charles Dawson and Judah Zachary are your complementary heels to one another. They're both all in. They're both invested with the heel character, and they're fun to watch.
Yeah. I mean, I have to come back to Nicholas Blair just because he's able to do so much more.
Yeah.
But and Dawson has that. He has a pretty. At least he has an end.
Yeah.
I mean, at least it's something that, he gets a good death scene, and a lot of these characters don't get that.
I don't think it's as good as Nicholas Blair's end, but it's an end.
I mean, I haven't spent a long time thinking about their ends. I think Nicholas Blair's end is I'm sure it's tight. His end is well shaped. It's firm and muscular. You got that? I led you right into that. And Barnabas smiles a lot when he sees it. So there you go.
I like how with Nicholas, he's running for his life. He's literally just running to run. There's nowhere really to escape to. And he gets somewhere, and Barnabas watches him be destroyed, and you see the biggest smile on Jonathan Fritz's face.
It's like Whoopi Goldberg. I mean, it really is. It is a Whoopi Goldbergian smile, except there's no Ted Danson in inappropriate makeup.
Yeah. With Charles Dawson, I really love how Laura Parker's character Angelique takes advantage of an opportunity, a very small window. We see damsels in distress rarely save themselves, and she does save herself. And I think it's one of the biggest, to me, it's the biggest moment in Dark Shadows history where you actually see a damsel save herself. She has no magical powers. She just hits him over the head with a vase.
And that's, but she studied the fine art of that sort of combat, from Roger. How Roger dispatches Bruno.
Oh my god! And
face it.
But I really like the fact that you have that moment that once she escapes and she leaves and she goes to where the execution is happening and she burns the head of Judah Zachary. It's a great all around moment, and it is a great death scene that Humphrey Allen Alstrader's character gets to have.
Do you wish he had? Do you wish he had lived long enough to see his legal efforts fall apart? At the execution.
I think that would have been a really interesting climactical scene where you could have had Humphrey Allen Alstrader's character going, no, she's a fraud. She's the one who's possessed. He could have argued that, and then that's where Carl does shoot, Gerard Stiles, and then you see the head melt away. So now Charles Dawson can't say really anything because it's just been exposed that Charles Dawson is lying. I think that'd have been a great moment too.
Now wait a minute. You accuse Charles Dawson of lying? Now hang on.
Well, Charles Dawson,
of course, he lies all the time. He's a horrible man.
Well, you could have had a scene where when Laura Parker's character shows up with Ted, where she could have just snuck away when Charles Dawson's back was turned. Maybe she hits him and just knocks him unconscious. Maybe he wakes up and decides, okay, she's got to be going to the execution. And in his attorney moment where she has the head, he accuses her of witchcraft because she has the head of Judah Zachary. Well, this is where Desmond Collins shoots Gerard Stiles, and he shoots him for that reason, to expose not only Gerard Stiles, but to expose Charles Dawson. And that's something they could have had.
Yeah. It's a lot of exposing going on.
It is. I think that's another reason they probably didn't go with it. It's just too much, but it's a lot of fun to consider what if.
Absolutely. If you got to have your own what if comic book, like Marvel has or had or something like that, but about Dark Shadows, what would be some of the issues you would have?
What if a parallel time Victoria Winters came through the parallel time room, and entered into 1970 and left, but the difference being this Victoria Winters knows all the secrets. She knows Elizabeth is her mother, and she knows how she knows it, but she also knows the secret of one Barnabas Collins. Because the difference being is we've seen our timeline peek through and see the other side. Who's to say that this Victoria Winters didn't look in and see a vampire Barnabas Collins? So that's how she knows. Okay. So that's how she would know that Barnabas is a vampire in this time. And she just goes away. She doesn't stick around with the Collins family until she eventually does return. And she's not the goody two-shoe that we love and know. She's this sort of conniving person.
Yeah.
That'd have been interesting to see. That'd have been an interesting what if.
I agree.
And I would have had Alexander play it. I mean,
so what else? What would the next issue be?
Again, another one with Alexander. You could have had what if with the Leviathans. You could have brought her back in Benny Hill that way too, where she was mind controlled by the Leviathans and she's somebody who works for them. That's another what if you could have played with. Also, another big what if, Dark Shadows in space. Why not?
How would you have done that?
Dark
Shadows in space.
This is how I would have actually this is how I would have done it. Quentin Collins. I would have started with Quentin going into space as the werewolf. He's a werewolf, so he keeps the portrait. He keeps the portrait near him. He takes it on the spacecraft with him. Only to find out he's
on a spaceship.
Right. Put him on a spaceship.
But what's he doing on a spaceship?
He's an explorer through galaxy, Patrick.
All right. You know what? Barnabas, I'm going to boldly go. Oh, Quentin, I don't know. Uh, yeah. And then the moon is everywhere. He can't get away from it.
No, he can't. It's something too. He could have looked out and saw the moon, and sort of been thankful that he has this portrait. But here would have been the really unique twist. He's not the first Collins through space. They found a way to jettison Barnabas's coffin into space and send him deep, deep into space.
Who's they?
Whoever you want them to be.
Leviathans.
You could have had the Leviathans do it. Yeah, why not?
I think the reason why not is that it's a little weird even for Dark Shadows, but I don't think that's a reason not to do it.
My mind's in a crazy place, so don't mind me.
See, my first foray into weirdness, and I wrote this kind of with Gordon's voyeurism back in the 90s, was a Star Trek Dark Shadows crossover. Cool. Where there's a descendant of Quentin's or something like that. He's the captain of the starship, and that he's always avoiding the moon and things like that. But they find Barnabas's coffin floating in space, and so they take it on board. And of course, Worf or somebody goes and unlocks it. He thinks there's some blood wine in it or something, and so you get Barnabas running around. And then you got like the Jem'Hadar, they get bitten, okay, and so then they have to have Ketracel red, they have to have like blood, so you got vampire Jem'Hadar. Then I thought, wow, what about vampire Borg? The Borg try to assimilate Barnabas, and instead Barnabas's hemoglobin goes back into the tube and takes them over. Yeah. And so Barnabas has all that going on, but the really cool part was it was a scene in the Q continuum, in that sort of that Civil War Q continuum, of Angelique and Q running for their lives. They're together, and Angelique's in the Q continuum with Q. They're running for their lives. They're terrified. They're at a telegram. They're desperately trying to signal Starfleet or something like that. Because it's all a metaphor in that sort of universe. It was Voyager, so God only knows what's going on. And we realize what they're afraid of. And there is a giant kind of dragon-shaped Asian dirigible that's chasing them, right? It's this big steampunk thing. And it opens up, right? There's, and a gangway comes down. And dressed in sort of full Fu Manchu attire, but with hands, with like green flame rising from them, is Nicholas Blair.
Cool.
Who has somehow taken over the Q continuum, and Angelique is somehow there to stop them. And so Q has to, enlist, of course, Captain Collins and the others on that to deal with this horrible problem of Nicholas Blair taking over the Q continuum. That's a story. I have no idea where it would have gone. I wrote the first chapter and got bored, but it was good for that first chapter.
It would have been cool to see Dark Shadows go into space.
Of course, yeah. I did this. I'm sure it's dead now, but I had this Dark Shadows TNG thing going on during. Which is also my PlayStation handle. This Dark Shadows TNG thing going on, which was my speculation. I started doing this when I was doing the watch through 2012 of what future storylines would have been. And I had Morgan Collins, who was an astronaut. Yeah. And he's on the Collins Star 1 space station. Because they build ships, so why wouldn't they, become a NASA contractor, of course, with their vast knowledge of canned seafood. Mm-hmm. That's vital for the survival of the astronauts. So, they're trying new canning techniques in space. And, they bring something back. Yeah, and so on. And it's like there's a Lovecraftian angle because all those creatures are living in space and so on. But yeah, I don't remember what else happened with it. I also had Charles Napier. You know Charles Napier, the actor?
Yeah.
The bad guy in Rambo, First Blood
Yeah.
Part 2, with all the teeth, and he's the head of the good old boys in Blues Brothers. He's in all the Russ Meyer movies. He's one of my favorite actors. I love Charles Napier. He was my second choice for Cisco, actually. He would have been great. Wonderful Cisco. But Charles Napier is from the southern branch of the family. He's Hank Collins. And I don't know what else he would have done. But that was
See, John De Laurentiis, who plays Q, it's interesting. He was actually, him and Richard Dean Anderson were in a Western series that only lasted like a couple
Are you
episodes.
talking about Legend?
Yeah.
I loved Legend. I have Legend on iTunes.
Really, really interesting show.
Produced by Michael Piller, who left Voyager specifically to do Legend for UPN.
It's funny because Richard Dean, people ask which character you most liked, Richard Dean Anderson. He goes, Legend.
Sure, he got to play a very un-Richard Dean Anderson part.
Yeah.
And he's marvelous. Richard Dean Anderson, very clever actor. The man who was in charge of the graduate program where I got my directing degree, and I had to take acting classes from this guy named John Dennis, who had been Richard Dean Anderson's acting teacher, and said he was one of the cleverest actors he had ever seen. And he was also Jonathan Frakes's early director and acting teacher, and said Frakes was one of the funniest men he had ever seen. And the real tragedy of Jonathan Frakes, since you demanded we talk about it as part of this discussion of ghosts on Dark Shadows, is that he was too handsome to be considered for wacky comedy. But wacky comedy is what Frakes did best.
Who's your favorite?
According to JD.
Who's your favorite comedian, Patrick?
You've got to specify that question a lot more because there's so many. So, like stand-up comedian? Do you mean like living or dead? Do you mean like physical comedian?
We'll say stand-up, living or dead. How's that?
Stand-up comedian, living. Well, I think George Carlin.
Yeah.
Certainly, absolutely one of the best. I would say, if you're looking at the greatest stand-up comedian of all time, probably George Carlin. Yeah, I know that's a lame answer because everybody says George Carlin, but I think there's a real reason for that.
George Carlin, the host of Shining Time Station at one point in time.
That's right.
My favorite living, obviously Rodney Dangerfield. My God.
Well, what a great choice.
Yeah.
He's going to get respect from you. When did you first see Rodney Dangerfield? When were you first aware of Rodney Dangerfield?
My mother showed me Caddyshack, and
that was the first time I saw him. Also, which sort of indicates our age. And he's phenomenal in that movie. That is such a good movie, and have you seen this thing on Netflix called? It's about like the birth of National Lampoon.
No, I have not.
It's very good, and it gets into it's not a documentary, although there are documentaries about that. It's a docudrama kind of thing, and it gets into the making of Caddyshack. That was very interesting. That was almost sort of supposed to be a National Lampoon movie, and a lot of interference from the studio. The guy who was in charge of it was one of the founders of National Lampoon. He was the guy who wrote it and helped produce it. And here's the wacky thing: he didn't like the gopher. The gopher was this thing the studio insisted on. And he's like, God, I hate the gopher. And of course, now when people think Caddyshack, they think of the gopher. And I remember being 9, I think, when that movie came out, 9 or 10. I think that was 1980 that film came out. And that gopher was the funniest damn thing I had ever seen. And I can talk for a long time, but I won't, about the perfection, literally the structural perfection of the Baby Ruth scene and why it's so funny and why it works.
Who's your favorite living comedian? Patrick, are you there? What happened? Nah, come back. Come back. Oh my God. Well, we made it to the 30-minute mark. Hello? I think I lost him. All right. Hello? Yeah.